Well, welcome everyone to the Happy Farm D podcast. My name is Chris Bakley, and I'm your host today, sharing it with Alex Barker. And we also have pharmacy student Kevin Lan joining us today. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for being here today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, anytime. No, glad to have you guys here. Today's a different episode. We're going to kind of jump into some research that's been done while Kevin was on rotation with Alex. So I kind of want to jump right into it and let either one of you lead the way and kind of jump into just what exactly you researched, how you got this idea in mind, and we'll go from there.
Have you ever wondered if you could somehow get what is a group of people's feelings about something, whatever the topic is? I think we all, the traditional thing we look to is like polls, right? So the political polls say that this person's going to win the race. Well, now with how sophisticated technology is getting, it's becoming easier and easier to look at a group of people, look at what they write, what they talk about, and ask that question, which is, what do they think about? So what I was wondering in the back of my head, I don't know, maybe like 6 months ago, was what does pharmacy think about pharmacy? What do the people in our community collectively, what do they say about us, ourselves online? And I think when I say that, some people know exactly what I'm talking about. There are, if you were to type in something like pharmacist job, there's some pretty vitriolic, pretty angry posts, especially in anonymous forums and online places, about where the profession is heading, particularly in special sectors of pharmacy. But there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger, and I wondered, is there a way to like gauge this? Because I think some of the associations, they're putting forth this image that pharmacy is changing. We want it to change. We want to be provider status. But what do pharmacists actually think about? So that led me on a long path. Definitely nothing really came of the idea until I stumbled across this, I think it was a blog post about subreddits. And what this guy had done was he looked at, I think like the Republican and Democratic subreddits, and he compared the two, or he compared the words that were commonly used. And I found it fascinating because you saw just how strong language people were using in these places. And I thought, I wonder if I could do that for some of these forums, some of these places where people are posting things, especially if they're anonymous. Now, this is probably where Kevin comes in, because at this point, I know my limitations. I don't know a blasted thing about coding, or I've done HTML, and HTML never want to do that again. Not my thing. So we reached out to a friend of Happy Farm D, David Vu, and I said, hey, who do you know that has any kind of background with neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP? Because that is totally out of my realm, what I'm comfortable with. And he said, well, I don't think I know anybody. And I said, okay, who knows Python? Who knows Python programming? Give me just the basics. What can we start with? And so that is how I connected with Kevin. Kevin and I, we met like 4 months ago to chat, I think.
Yeah, I think like April-ish, maybe?
Yeah, April. As of this recording, it's September. I think we'll publish this in maybe October, November. And to clarify, actually, Kevin, he wasn't on assignment with me at all. Kevin, out of the goodness of his heart and his own curiosity, is what drove him to help me with this. So while Kevin was hustling, I think in your internship,
I think I was preparing for PMP exam.
Oh, okay. So while he's hustling, doing stuff, and I'm over here pretending to work as an entrepreneur, he's coming into Zoom rooms like this one and saying, "Hey, what are we doing?" And we're figuring it out. And so what we had found is that it is possible to essentially anyone has public access to this. Anyone has public access to Reddit, and anyone has public access to their API, which would allow anyone to gather up the individual words that people use. And there is a way to look at libraries of words that give word scores based on their sentiment, positive or negative. And you can gather up all that data and ask the question, is it more positive or negative? That took us a long time to get to that point. So Kevin, I think you have a better understanding of like the history of our methodology and how we put this all together, because, I was just, I was hoping that you would somehow be able to understand all of this. And I was just like, hey, can we collect this data and analyze it? And you were like, oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested. How did you get into this, Kevin, and what was your part?
So I mean, I feel like school kind of prepared me well for this because I did a lot of journal club, and for journal club, the study design, we want to really like critically like assess like what's our goal, what we want to achieve here, like what do we want to see like from data, and how are we going to translate that to what the conclusion we want to propose. And so we want to analyze the word, and there are so many actually sentiment analysis. The method that we're using is just one little branch of the natural language processing. I think one of the famous group was doing it is in Stanford, and a bunch of Google branch like departments is actually using it to analyze commercial use, which is really cool. And so somehow I was able to do analysis and extract data from the bits and pieces, and to know what does this sentence even mean. Are they trying to be positive, or are they trying to be negative? And we break down into words. It's kind of weird that you're giving a soul to a word, and you're kind of looking at it as like, oh, what's the emotion from this, and see the
Yeah.
vibe from it.
Yeah. So how did you so going a little further than that, how did you get to that point where you're trying to look at the positive and negative aspects of it?
So I was doing like research on machine learning, and natural language processing was one of the bigger one that we're trying to look. And under my research, under my PI, there's another research which is on natural language processing, but on doing a neural network of protein and drug interactions. And so I kind of took that idea a little bit, kind of stole that. I'm sorry, but I kind of stole it. But so this method is sort of like using that, and I found that sort of like kind of stole the idea of like using neural network, but instead we're breaking the words apart and analyzing it. And this method is kind of how I found it. Was sort of like by coincidence, sort of like when I was just preparing for my things day to day, and then somehow I just got this idea, what if we just like break the words apart and see what it feels like. And I'm pretty sure someone analyzed it, because definitely some people, Google, like the ads would know what we bought recently, like Nike ad if you recently bought Nike shoes, and somehow like they probably figured this out somewhere. And so I just thought, might give a try, and to see if there's anything out there that actually have this, and which there is. And there's a whole lot of research behind this too. Some of the more intensive one that Alex and I was like, oh man, this can go actually really, really, really far down.
Yes. So I've done both academic research study. I'm doing one right now about burnout and imposter syndrome. And one of the things that I don't like about that process is that you kind of have to have a really good understanding of what you're doing from the very beginning. And unfortunately, when you do that, that doesn't allow always for really great creativity as you go along. So, I told Kevin, we have a question. Let's try to answer it to the best of our ability. And unfortunately, in the very beginning, I wouldn't say unfortunately, but like he just said, we went really, really deep. And we were like, okay, we could probably hire like a few PhD people with with NLP experience behind them to help us with this, but that's just, it's way, 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 way too in depth. So essentially what we did, and if you want, there will be a link in the description somewhere that'll show like our process and all of the details and results of our findings. Essentially what we just did is we use this thing called the AFIN library. It was made by, what's his name? Aphinius Chris or something like that, you know?
His last name is Afin. Forgot
Okay.
his first name, but
Yeah. So
cool.
his name was Afin. What this guy did was he took, I want to say like 5,000 some odd words, and he took them, there were some of the most common words, and he gave them a score from -5 to +5. So something like, I'm just giving an example, this isn't true, but like hate or a swear word potentially could be like a -5, whereas love is a +5. And by mapping this out, by having, negative obviously being -5 and positive being +5, you can begin to turn words into numbers. Now, there's obviously a lot of problems that come with building a process like this, but it gives us a little tiny bit of a framework, and that's exactly what we did. So what we did was we used the API from Reddit and a Python program that Kevin masterfully managed, and I didn't have to touch it. We stripped all of the comments from the top posts from the last year, including COVID, right? So it was from June 1st, 2019 to June 1st, 2020. We parsed out the individual words. So we separated each individual word, put that all into a filter to put out like punctuation and stop words and other things like that, cleaned up that list. And then with what words were left over, we put them into the AFIN library to give each of them a number so that we could have like a scorecard and begin doing an analysis. Am I butchering our methodology, Kevin, or that sounds about right?
No, you're right on the spot.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm just curious before you keep going. And now at this point, how long did this already take just to get to this point? When you started, like, when you began the process of I want to do this and then actually got to here, how long did that take?
From our first meeting, we could go into my Google Calendar and that would be the honest truth. I'd guess 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I think our planning, just the planning before hitting this, it's about a month, and we want to be like thoroughly planned out. So, when we do this, we don't have any doubts. We don't have any sort of room for error. We just, straight shot, go for it.
Yeah. And then we had the data. I would say we were playing around with the data for another month or maybe another 6 weeks, because we would look at it and we would ask more questions and we would like say, well, what if we do this with the data? How can we show, the real results that we were looking at? I will audibly give the results, but if you are as someone like me who kind of needs to see it, again, I just click that link. I think if you click it, you can still listen to this while we go through it.
Yeah, and Alex, before you do give the results, before we jump into that, what was your guys' original hypothesis? Just for the listeners, what was before you looked at all the data, what did you think was going to happen? What did you think the result was going to be?
Kevin?
So yeah, we were thinking, like, I guess a little bit pessimistically, we were thinking, like maybe people will just like swear the pharmacy out. Like this job, could be just as saturated as it sounds. And so that's what we thought. But, the result came out to be very interesting. And depending on how you look at it, like there's probably more study can be done to actually show the in-depth result of that.
Absolutely. So let's go through some of the data that we collected. This is all in the first table here. So the overall sentiment analysis, drum roll. was positive to negative for a ratio of 1.38. So it demonstrates a positive skew, which you can see in the third figure. We reviewed 299 posts, that's almost 300, and examined over 21,000, just over 21,000 words using the AFIN library. We had 12,669 positive ones and 9,181 negative words were used. So that's great. We can talk a little bit more about some of the graphs that we had. The average word score, so if you took all of the words that were used, was 0.266. I guess reiterate what Kevin said, I realize, I think every researcher goes through this. When you start looking at a question, it reveals all of your biases. And if you noted from the very beginning when I said that, I said, what do pharmacists say about pharmacy online? And obviously, being an online entrepreneur, I want to know, what are people saying? Now, LinkedIn is much more positive, and so I see a lot of that because I'm very active there. But I know that when you search in Google and you type in pharmacist jobs, you're going to find a lot of negative stuff from anonymous users. I've seen those posts. People call me. I get emails from students saying like, hey, I don't think I should pursue pharmacy. So my bias is fully revealed because our positive skew goes totally against what we had hypothesized. We were expecting negative. However, and I think this is a good point for Kevin to come in because he's the one who really understands this.
Yeah.
Kevin?
So sorry, I literally just jumped in because so for the result, which is interesting, although like in the big picture, there's, more positive than negative, but if you actually stripped it down by score, it's actually really interesting because the positive scores are, slightly, because we're looking at total positive score, but we didn't look at sort of deviation of positive score because it's from 1 to 5 and -1 to -5. And somehow the positive score that, they have the most number 2 score, which is, they're not so positive, but they're slightly better than neutral. While like the negatives are way higher on the sort of the more negative side. So -4 score is higher than the 4 score. -3 score is actually a little bit less, but from the 4 and 5 has higher score. And so it kind of leads sort of another question would be what exactly they say and how they say it. So that's like one little thing about sort of one
Let's hold off on that because that's definitely a discussion point.
That's a discussion
I
point.
I think I know what you're about to get into.
Yeah.
I want to ask about that too.
Yes. One of the things
also
that
like
I think
some of the words that we found out, like who used a lot, that's also another discussion point. But like from the distribution of words, such as the word I just used, like, and stuff like that, like can have multiple meanings, and things like that can skew the whole scoring system. So that's what we found out. It's really interesting.
And like was the most common word, over 1,400 instances of the word used. And that, it's more than double than the second most commonly used word, which was want. Let's get into the discussion, Kevin. And I didn't want to deviate too much from what you were saying. So I think what you were leading into was the fact that our results are heavily skewed by the word like.
Yeah. And we found out because I did
using like,
but I did a sensitive analysis, and seems like if we took out like, honestly, the whole balance would go off, more becoming like a neutral balance, and which is really interesting because we, the thought originally we have was a little bit more pessimistic. The early result we got was totally the opposite. And now we end up in discussion saying, we have a very like neutral result in comparison to the previous one. It's only slightly more positive than just, like from being neutral, which is really interesting.
And it
Yes.
also, it couldn't pick up if someone used it in like a sarcastic way or if
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
right.
Another discussion point is that the AFIN library is analyzing individual words. You can say, "Oh, I love going to work," but we all know what you're really saying. You're not loving going to work. You're sarcastic, and so that it's a huge hole in our methodology. But the truth is, Kevin and I are just learning. Okay, be a little gentle. When
I'll give you a break on this one. I'll give you a break.
Thank you. We had, I want to say 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 people review our first draft, and that was the number one thing. People were saying like, you're not going as deep as you should, and we're like, we're pharmacists, guys. Like, do you know how hard this was? But I thought Kevin, I know you're in the middle of it, so like as a student, like that's your life. It's like you don't know enough. That's what I felt like anyway as a student. Is like, I can never achieve what they want. I felt like that way with this article. I was like, there's just no way we can do that level of sophistication with programming. I know I can't for sure. And Kevin, I know, this was a new endeavor for you. You've never done anything before in research for NLP. So
No, yeah.
if you're listening and you think, guys, come on, you only went halfway, well, help us out. We are open to doing more research. Kevin is a hot commodity in the NLP and pharmacy world. So we would be more than willing to work with you. But yes, our results are not as powerful as probably what they could be. So now what we need is people to come alongside us, help us out. That's what
yeah,
we
we
Just
do
say I was
think,
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin. Go
we
ahead.
just think that this is a really good start point because it reveals a lot about like pharmacy words and like analysis of subreddit and how we can chop it better in the next round, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the direction we should take for? I think that's the most important one.
Absolutely. We learned a ton. In the beginning, when we first looked at the results, we were really kind of confused. And it was because we included all of these words it was the biggest bracket of words from -5 to +5. And you probably already know what that is. 0, neutral words. They are neither positive nor negative. And we were like, well, what do we do with these? Oh, let's just remove them because they don't tell us anything. They are literally meaningless. Anyone uses them. So in order to figure out the word sentiment analysis, we needed to look at positive or negative. I think this is probably a good place to wrap up.
And I did have one question for you guys though, because you said you made a point to say you covered including COVID, like the portion of when
Yes.
it started.
Uh-huh.
Did you see? I'm not sure if you looked at this, but did you see any difference in more negativity, or not, once you hit that time frame compared to before?
We didn't specifically look at dates or like a timeline.
Okay.
That's a good question. That would be very interesting. We discovered our limitations really early on. What we really wanted to do was pick really popular sites that people go to. The pharmacy Reddit has a active community, and there's a lot of great people in there. And we really wanted like student doctor forum.
Student doctor network.
Yeah, student doctor network. Sorry, we really wanted that. I really wanted to look at like Facebook, but then you get with all of those things, you start getting into privacy issues, and we wanted to keep it simple, and we wanted to get this thing published as quickly as possible. So we decided to go for the easiest low hanging fruit that other people have used, other people have done. But I think in the future, I think it would be, really interesting to see, what is the language that people use in these groups. I would venture a guess that if we were to look at some forums, again, just look at the top 10 on Google when you search for this stuff, and you would probably venture a guess that the majority of some of these things are either positive or negative. I think it would be interesting to repeat this in a year. Kevin will be really busy in a fellowship, so I don't even know if we can get him to spare an hour of time, but it would be really interesting to continue this. I just don't know what the next steps are. Kevin?
Hey, maybe my fellowship will sponsor this. Who knows?
That would be fantastic. That would be awesome.
But yeah, I just think, there's we have to dig so much deeper, and we require a lot of resources to dig into one little question from the limitation we saw in this study. And so I feel like this is sort of as good as it gets, as sort of like a good surveying level, and to see what's the general vibe or mood on pharmacy.
Especially something that you guys aren't, in terms like Alex was not very, did not know, how much to get into this. He's getting into something, that he never tried before. And I think you guys did an awesome job, especially for something that was pretty brand new for both of you. And I think it's, you can always do more, and that's, you can always dig in, but I think it gave you a good perspective to go deeper and to see what things you do want to analyze more. So I think that's definitely awesome work, guys. And for people listening out there, what would in terms of going forward, when you guys reflect on this, how do you feel, personally, what you got out of this?
I highlighted it a little bit earlier, but bias. We all have our biases, and I was pleasantly shocked to see our results. Yes, they were skewed heavily by the word like, and it just makes me want to ask more questions. Truth be told, I even was considering for about a month, should I go get a PhD? I've had a mentor tell me that I should do that, but that's a huge commitment, and I got a lot going on already. So I think it lit a fire underneath me. For those of you that are listening for like career experience, and you're still with us at this point, I would encourage you. This did not take much. It took a skill that Kevin had that was essential. It took a little bit of my experience from publishing things in the past, a little bit of like research methodologies and thinking. It took Kevin, putting in the work, gathering the data, parsing out things, thinking critically about the answers, and asking bigger and better questions to make our research better. If you're wanting to make a career move, like doing something like this, even if it's not NLP or maybe it's just a research question, it's doable. You can do this. So I would just encourage you, if you feel like you should, give it a shot. It's very interesting. So
I love that.
That's my reflection. Kevin?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And honestly, the first thing I saw the result, I was kind of happy. I'm like, this is not what I expected. And there's always opportunity out there because it's not that negative. As before, that's a challenge because, COVID, saturation, and how competitive it is right now. I feel like kind of similar to our research. There's so many things, so many little details you can get into. And I feel like it's not that bad, but you have to look into it like in detail. Like, what do you want to do? What kind of subfield you want to be good at? And, you have to go from there. You can't just look at it and thinking about it from broad, like you Google and be like, oh, this is so bad. But no, it's actually not bad. And so I was super happy about this. I was super excited.
Me too.
Now that's awesome, guys. I mean, thank you so much for going over the whole research you guys did together. And I know if people want to actually look more at the physical graphs and not just listening, I know they can see the attachment with the article posted, and definitely send questions our way if they have any for you two. And I'm sure a lot of people might throw some thoughts, for other things to look into deeper. And now that we've seen that, the topical aspect of this, I think it opens up a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of doors for further research if you guys are willing.
Yeah, I think the Happy PharmD needs to open up a research nonprofit. That's what I think needs to happen.
Research happy hour.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being on today, and I look forward to seeing what other research comes up in the future.
Thank you.
Awesome.